Hi everyone, welcome to my Endgame lecture series on Tuesdays. Today I want to focus on an important topic in the ending, not the Berlin ending, and it's king position in the endgame. And in the endgames we're going to look at today, the main theme is one side has a better king than the other. And usually in the opening, when you move your king up, like most of our chess club members do, then you don't do very well. But in the end game, now you're looking good. Now, what I did last time was I started with an ending of a good player, then I looked at my end games, and then finished with an ending of a good player, me. However, I'm doing the opposite this time. We're going to look at my game, and then look at good games, and finish with my game. This was a game I played before everybody was born. The only people on Earth were me and my opponent. So the endgame play wasn't very good. However, when the endgame finished, I talked to pal Benko about it, my pal Benko. Now, most of you think Benko's a good endgame player because he has a column on the endgame. So you have been thusly tricked. Very good. Okay, so I had this position in the World Open, I'm going to say 1985, 1986. I'm probably right. It's probably one of those years. And I was white, and I thought a long time, and I played the move king to d5, okay, which is ridiculous. And my idea was he'll make a random move, which he did, and I'll play e6, and he'll take, and I'll go here, and so forth. That was my plan, okay? But after king to d5, I think actually he played here, and I played e6. He played the only move that draws. Who can find it? Jim Volker.
Rook f5.
Rook f5 check. And now, irrespective of where my king goes, I can't win because my king needs to be on d5. So if I go here, for example, he pins my pawn. And I guess I could try to lose. I mean, e7 loses, so that's pretty bad. Okay, and this is the way the game finished. We agreed to a draw here. Okay, and then we didn't have computers back then that played chess anyway. So I analyzed the position by myself, and I found a forced win for white. And actually, about 13 years later, I had the bad side of a very similar position, and my opponent could have won by playing the same idea I'll show you here, and he didn't find it. And after the game, I showed him, and he was shocked. Anyway, after this game, and I figured out the way to win, I saw pal Benko there walking around, and I showed him this position, and I said, what do you think about it? White to play. And he said, oh, it's a draw. And then I showed him the winning move, and he said, oh yeah, now it's a win. So it changed his mind immediately when shown the right move. So white to play and win, who can figure it out? Ooh, me. Oh wait, I already figured it out. But I figured it out so long ago, I forgot it. So it was such a long. So the move is very counterintuitive. It's the last move you would think of. That's why I didn't think of it. That was good reason. Now the normal way to play is to play like f7, then king e7, and then you don't win, because here you have no threat. If you ever queen, for example, black just takes everything. Okay, and I can't win, although I could get the opposition with king e8. Dang, I should have done this. Okay, but actually, you don't want to queen your f pawn. You want to queen your e pawn. Because when you queen your f pawn, black's king is close to the e pawn. But when you clean your f pawn, it's really clean. Okay, and Mike Hummer will tell you, when the chess club closes, we clean all those pieces, especially me. That's about all I do. So if you can queen this pawn somehow, the black king is going to have a tough time getting all the way to the f pawn. Also, if you queen your f pawn, your e pawn is on the 5th rank. If you queen your e pawn, your f pawn's on the 6th rank. Also, if you queen your e pawn, the black rook isn't behind your e pawn. So queening your e pawn is really good because black will have to play rook e1 to stop it. So having said all that, I've given away the first move. I'm sure you all know. You're the only one who knows. King f7, right? That's the winning move. Now white wins easily. Black has to play rook e1 to prevent the queening. And we queen. And very easy win, of course. And most of you can mate with the queen. Not the Thursday people, but most of you can. Okay, so king f7 would win. It's sort of funny to put your king in front of your advanced passed pawn, but it actually saves the tempo, because if you queen your f pawn by playing the move king e7 and then f8 queen, that's one king move. If you queen your e pawn, it's also one king move. And the difference is black has to play rook e1. He doesn't have to move his rook if you queen your f pawn. So king f7 wins handily. Luckily, we have computer engines now that can back me up. And I asked, is this winning? And instead of saying plus 20, plus 30, it just said backed up. So I was like, all right. So king f7, the only winning move. Although I didn't find it. Well, okay, one of the most famous rook and pawn endings, since Julian was asking about rook and pawn endings, is this one. Capablanca Tartakower. And this was played in the famous New York 1924 tournament. Is that your favorite tournament, Mike Kummer? Or do you prefer 27? That was the tough question. They're both good tournaments. Now, if black plays rook takes c3 check, white will play king g4 and king takes f5, and white has two connected passed pawns. That's pretty good. So Tartakower just took the bishop. And in this position, material is equal, and black is threatening rook takes c3 check, after which he would be a pawn ahead. And the white A pawns and D pawns are very weak. Now, since this is the most famous rook and pawn ending ever, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Can I help you? Are you familiar with it? Yeah, and Jim Volker is like, what? Yeah? Yeah, maybe? Vaguely familiar. Okay, good enough. Now, if you remember the theme of our lecture, and I did say it a few minutes ago, so you know, you're probably playing video games at home right now, but it was king position. If black were to play rook takes c3 check here, I don't think white would have a good king position. You see what I'm saying? I think the king would go back and it would be terrible. Okay, if white wants to move his king up the board, other than cheating with king e4, king g4, how could he actually do it without cheating? King to g3, and after takes king to h4, or as I would say, put it in h. Now, it's very difficult to protect the f4 pawn. And when I say very difficult, I mean impossible. So black played rook f3, and even though it was 1924, he was looking forward to playing Pac-Man. Rook f4, rook d4, rook a4. And white has no pawns left. But that's okay, white only needs one pawn. Now, Tartakower was not familiar with the blitz game between Ben Feingold and Mike Kummer, played earlier today, where Kummer's king and pawn were up there and it looked like he was going to checkmate me. He was shocked that he didn't. And Capablanca obviously was familiar with that and played the move g5, and then king g5, g6, king g5, king f6 with a mating attack, just like Kummer could have done. And king to f6, threatening rook h8 mate. So even though black is up 2 pawns, I slightly prefer white's king. Slightly. Also, my g6 pawn is a little bit better than your pawns. Also, the white rook is going to take all the black pawns. And the white king could take the f5 pawn. Now, most of you in the audience would play king takes f5. That's actually the last thing you want to do. And if you were thinking that at home, you should be ashamed. That's not the only thing you should be ashamed about, too. I know who you are. So after king f5, white's king has no shelter. Okay? And Capablanca knew a lot about shelter because his favorite group was the Rolling Stones. Capablanca was all over that. So king to f6, it's impossible for black to check from behind because the f5 pawn is in the way. And if you were watching Mike Kummer's lecture earlier, and I'm sure you were, there was a game where Selden Trimble, with a white pawn on h6, played king h7, and the white pawn was blocking Mario's attack. Very similar. Capablanca learned almost all of his endgame knowledge from Mario. Almost all of it. Okay, now white's threatening rook h8 mate, and these guys were grandmasters, so king g8. Rook g7 check, an excellent move. Most people would play rook takes c7, but actually it's very difficult for black to make a move here. If king h8, it's hard to get out of the mating net, so obviously he played it anyway. If king f8 and we play rook takes pawn, we're still threatening all these checkmates. King h8, I wouldn't do that. Okay, now I would resign if I was black. And I guess if you don't resign, you play rook e8. Okay, good. Yeah, now material is equal, but now black has the pawn hanging and black's king is in the corner. Just terrible. The game ended quickly. And white's up 2 pawns, and white was down 2 pawns about 6 moves ago. What a turnaround. Okay, and for some reason there's no resigning going on here. Why isn't black resigning? So what's happening? What world am I in? Okay, now he resigned. Okay, so very suspicious non-resignation there for a few moves. But you can see the most important thing was king position. Now, my dad was very impressed with that game. He liked the way white sacrificed all his pawns because king could move up, black's king was terrible, and black had to give a lot of pawns away to avoid checkmate. Black's rook was worse, black's king was worse, and he made it look like it was a very easy win. One of Capablanca's most famous endgames. Now, this is Botvinnik's most famous ending, although this point was argued earlier today by my son Spencer. He's like, this is his most famous game? So, you know, you can pick and choose. Now, this game reminds me a lot of a game I discussed last week where Alexei Shirov played the move bishop h3, put it in h, and won brilliantly. This is very similar. Now, most of you, if you were playing this position, would agree to a draw because bishop opposite colors, no legal way to win. The h pawn can't queen, the g pawn can't queen, d pawn can't queen. Your only passed pawn is the b pawn, and white has 2 pieces stopping that. So this looks like it's completely drawn. In fact, if you put it on your engine, the engine also thinks it's a draw, but you know, the engine isn't quite as sentient as Botvinnik. Botvinnik was pretty good. And I have a lot of funny Botvinnik stories. One of them was, in the early 60s, the Soviet Union was picking the Olympic team. Although at that time, Olympic team picks you, because it was, you know, Soviet Russia. And all the top players were sitting around, and they decided the one world champion super grandmaster who wouldn't make the team was Botvinnik. They said, he's no good. And somebody's like, well, he's the world champion. Okay, but they had a lot of world champions, or future or former world champions. They had Smyslov, they had Keres, they had Bronstein, they had Tal, they had Spassky, and they're like, yeah, Botvinnik's no good. Eventually, they put Botvinnik on board 1 instead of not letting him on the team, and he won the gold medal. So maybe he was okay. I forgot Petrosian also. Pretty good team. Okay, reasonable team. Anyway, yeah, and Tal even wrote about it. He's like, you know, we thought Botvinnik was no good, but he's pretty good. Okay, so Botvinnik's black in this position, and it looks like a draw. He's playing Alexander Kotov. I actually have a funny Kotov story, and it's a really good time killer. So let's use it. Kotov was driving in Russia, okay, so dangerous. And he was driving with the FIDE president. This was in the 80s. Florencio Campomanes, your favorite FIDE president. And of course, the cops pulled them over, because, you know, it's Russia. And Kotov was driving, and he was like, because he's with the FIDE president. And gets his driver's license, goes back to the cop car, comes back, he says, no ticket for you, you're Alexander Kotov. And Kotov's like, oh, you're not giving me a ticket because I'm the famous chess grandmaster Alexander Kotov. And he's like, what? He's like, no, I'm not giving you a ticket because my name's also Kotov. So he thought he was a great chess player, but he just had the same name as the cop. Okay, so Kotov's white against Botvinnik, and bishop e7 attacking the pawn. Bishop f5, daring him to take the pawn. Do you think white should capture this pawn? What do you think? I see heads shaking. I hear a lot of noise rattling around going on. Okay, the answer is fries. I mean, the answer is no, because then you'd lose your h pawn, and then black would put it in h. Black needs that h pawn to queen. So white just plays bishop f6 and says, no, you can't trick me. Okay, king to f3. Now we're going to attack the e pawn and try to queen our d pawn. How are we going to win the e pawn? We're going to move this and hope that this king goes and takes it, then we'll take the e pawn. But Kotov's not falling for that either. Mike Hummer's like, ridiculous. That's not going to happen. You have a question, sir?
Play bishop to d4.
Okay, he played bishop e7. Bishop to d4 is the same, and he pushes the pawn, and he goes king c3, and he's like, okay, take my e pawn, I don't care. And Botvinnik plays bishop e6, an amazing move. Obviously, if king takes b3, d4 check, and we take this, and this pawn's looking pretty strong, this pawn's looking pretty weak. Okay, so Kotov didn't fall for that. Kotov played bishop c5, and the players agreed to a draw next game. No, that's not what happened. Okay, now Botvinnik played the greatest combination ever seen in an endgame, totally confusing Mike Kummer. He played g5, just like Mike would do. Now obviously, if we take with the h-pawn, then this h-pawn's pretty strong. And when I say pretty strong, that's an understatement. That will soon be a queen. So obviously he took with f-pawn. Now if you're going to play g5 sacking a pawn, what's your follow-up, Mike? d4 sacking your other pawn, as expected. Now the point is, if black, let's go back. If black ever tries to take this pawn, white will play bishop e7. If black ever tries to take this pawn, he'll play bishop c5. So whichever pawn you attack, I defend it. But by playing g5, now bishop e7 no longer defends the h-pawn. Illegal. You can't jump over your pawn. And by playing the move d4 check, he makes it difficult for white to recapture. For example, king takes pawn is risky, as Julian will tell you based on his bishop and pawn ending earlier, b2. So the king can't do it. So he took with the pawn, and now king g3, and we're going to take the h-pawn, and we're going to have two passed pawns on opposite sides of the board. These two passed pawns are blocked by a bishop. The white king can't come and help because b2 is winning. If you remember the theme of this lecture, it's been like 5 or 10 minutes. It's king activity. White's king is basically babysitting the b3 pawn. Black's king's all over the place. And white's pawns can't queen because the bishop stops them both. Black's h-pawn can queen because black's king is going to escort it along. Bishop a3, Kotov has the right idea. His bishop will stop the pawn, and my king can do stuff. I have a king too. Takes, h4, and he's like, there's pawns on both sides of the board. What do I do? Well, the bishop can't stop both pawns. You just push them both. The bishop can't go. So we need the bishop to stop one and the king to stop the other. So he played king f3. And Mike Kummer's like, wait a minute. Why don't you just play d5?
Why did, when his king was over back on c3,
yeah.
Why does he just go bishop to d6?
Bishop d6 check.
Yeah.
King takes h4.
Fine.
Fine. Let's analyze. Let's analyze. King takes h4. Which what?
Take anything.
What do you want to do?
I just want to move my bishop to b8 and d6 forever.
Right. I'm going to put my king on. Well, I'm going to put my king on g2 and do this.
And I'll take it whenever it hits.
And I'll take with the king.
Oh.
Then you're like, wait, that's not good for me. Yeah. You're like, wait, that's not a good ending. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, so Kotov tried to stop the b pawn with his king, with his bishop, and stop the h pawn with his king. He tried to anyway. Okay, and now here he resigned. And in fact, if you know a lot of opposite bishop endings, and I'm sure you do, this actually reminds me of the final position of Nakamura Carlsen from the Tal Memorial 2011. You can look that up at home. They're not going to remember in a minute, but you can write it down or something. Replay the video. Okay, and in that game, Naka also had to stop pawns on both sides, and your king can't move both directions. So obviously, the white king is going to babysit this pawn, and black's going to come do this. And then, unfortunately for white, the bishop is controlling the queening square, making the bishop and pawn ending very easy to win. So after bishop d5 check, Kotov resigned. But g5 was an amazing move. I'm sure Julian agrees, more amazing than bishop h3 from Shirov. And he's like, no. Yeah? I was kidding, but yeah. long as you agree. But the point of g5 is to win this h4 pawn, making it impossible for the bishop to defend because white's pawn is on g5. And if g5 doesn't win, which it does, you still play it because otherwise you can't do anything. So you get a chance to win. You get passed pawns everywhere. And opposite color bishop endings, if you have passed pawns, you want them as far as possible. Maybe one on this board and one on the next board. Okay, we call that Julian or Sarawan chess or something, I don't know. Lots of chessboards going on here. But okay, in this instance, H pawn and B pawn, that's pretty far apart. That's about as far apart as the Portlands, Maine and Oregon, right? Okay, Julian knows that kind of stuff. Although I was told Julian's moving to Florida, which I didn't agree with, but I was told that. You know, people who don't know anything. Okay, now the next game is my game with Bobby Fischer. Oh, wait a minute, that's not me. It's my dad's game with Fischer from 1963, which I'm sure you all memorized before class. Now, you'll notice there's an equal number of pawns, and it looks like all 10 pawns are isolated, but they're not. It just looks like they are. Okay, and the reason white has the advantage is white has a better king. White's king's on the 4th rank, black's king's on the 3rd rank. Another reason white has an advantage is this h6 pawn. That's very close to promoting. And it's on a dark square, so I don't think black's going to capture it unless he cheats. Okay, Fischer played bishop to a2 and said, it's your move. And black's like, I don't want to move. I like where my position is. There's actually more than one zugzwang in this game. But here, black has everything on the right square. You don't want to move this pawn, because then white's going to go take it. You don't want to move this pawn, because white's going to take it. You don't want to move this pawn, because it's illegal. Julian's like, I don't see what the problem is. Julian.
A4?
Yeah.
Bishop B1.
Now, bishop b1 you can't play. I didn't get to that yet. I suggested, but it's bad. Now, bishop c4 to b5. Yeah. Okay, so he played f5. They traded. And now, as Julian was about to point out, before I interrupted him, bishop b1, the recommendation of Mike Kummer, fails to e3. And now we're threatening the bishop, and we're threatening e2 and e1. So black would win. And that's what happened. Bobby Fischer resigned. Wait, that didn't happen. Okay, so Fischer saw that. By the way, if black can play e3, bishop b1 wins immediately. So you got to see e3, otherwise resigns. After e3, white resigns. Chess is tough. Okay, so he played bishop to b3, and unfortunately black has to move. Black doesn't want to move. Black's position's perfect. Okay, but he moves his bishop. Now after bishop e8, bishop g6 is risky, so black didn't do that. White would take the bishop and queen his h-pawn. If the bishop moves somewhere else, the bishop on f5 that is, your pawn is hanging. If you play a4, I take it. If you do anything, you lose. So black played the obvious move.
Check.
c5 check, I take en passant. And that's defended. So he played the obvious move, king e7, and when the bishop moves away, then king back to d6, and we're all set. But Fischer didn't move his bishop, shocking the audience. What did Fischer do? If he didn't move his bishop, he's only got one other move. Mike Kummer.
King E5.
King e5. Now, the king and pawn ending is incredibly winning for white, because the e4 pawn is going away. So my dad moved his bishop, and now Fischer played the most brilliant move of the game, although not really. Mike Kummer's like totally obvious.
Yeah.
Julian. Bishop to g6. And that h-pawn's pretty strong. We can't take the bishop because white gets a queen, but now white just takes everything, okay, and then resigns. So that was a nice endgame that Fischer won, basically because his king was much better than black's king. And having said that, this was the famous chess tournament where Fischer stayed up all night and then fell asleep against Bisgeier. What blunder did Bisgeier make in that game? Jim Volker.
I don't know.
Mike Kummer knows.
Woke him up.
He woke him up. Yeah, that was, what a blunder. All he had to do was not wake him up and he was all set. But he woke Fischer up and then Fischer beat him. Yeah. So that tournament was played in Bay City, Michigan, everybody's favorite tournament venue. All right. Now we'll get on to the game Yates-Marshall, a very suspicious game. But the players, between 1910 and 1930 didn't always play the endgame perfectly. They usually did, but not always. Okay. Now here, white is a queen up. So normally, if you're one of the best players in the world and you're up a queen, you will win. Normally. But, okay, this wasn't his day. Okay, and black is in check, so black escaped check. Now, if you put this on your engine at home, or if you're one of our more intelligent viewers here, white can announce mate. There's mate in 9, there's mate in 10, there's mate in 11, and there's several moves that do it. The best move is queen to c2, pinning the b pawn, and attacking the a4 pawn, and it's just made in a few moves. Black really can't do anything. But Yates thought he had it all figured out, okay, but he missed something. So I don't know if he was in time trouble or if even chess clocks existed. I don't think he had any increment or time delay. I don't think so. Not in 1929. Okay, maybe he just got a drink because it was 29. Who knows? Anyway, white played the incredible blunder king to c4. Okay, the biggest blunder of all time in this game anyway. And he thought if black queened, which black did do, that he would take said queen and he would play king b4, stopping the a pawn, and the f2 pawn is unstoppable. Okay, little did Yates know that in 1923, Rady made a chess problem very similar to this one, which was a white to play and draw, a puzzle you all know. Okay, and well, Marshall either knew the puzzle or he figured it out. But this is black to play and draw. Now what black wants to do, he wants to stop white from queening. That would be a good idea. And he wants to queen his own pawn. That's also a good idea. If you're taking notes, queening your own pawn is a good idea. What move can black make which simultaneously moves towards both pawns? Julian somehow. Well, that's not the right notation, but yeah.
I'm sorry, king b2.
King b2, right. Now, if it was black's turn to move, black would win. a3, a2, a1. Probably Yates would only look to king to c2, and then f4, resigns. That was probably the only variation he saw. But after king b2, he probably realized his indolence was inefficacious. Probably, right? Even though The Simpsons hadn't come out yet, he probably predicted it. Now, after king takes a4, the only move that doesn't lose, king c3, no problem. And we stop the pawn. Although he still tried to queen. Okay, then he's like, all right. Yeah, and now the game would normally continue this. And if you're a smart aleck, you go here. Okay, yeah, and then you promote to like a bishop. Then you go here. You can't claim a draw. The game is automatically ending in a draw. No more moves are allowed, or Mike Kummer puts the hammer down as the TD. So king b2 is a pretty cool move because it draws and it threatens to win. So white has to be on the ball here and play king takes a4, he loses. But that's funny, you're a queen up and you play king c4, triple question mark. Chessbase has no annotation for triple question mark. I can't get it to do it. So yeah, but anyway, every move wins, and I think Yates knew that.
You can put it in notes, right?
Yeah. I think Yates knew every move won, and he just didn't see king b2. He thought this was the easiest. Okay, but it was not only not the easiest, it was wrong. Okay, but that's okay. We can make fun of him for centuries. So, okay. Now, that game was pretty bad, but it was no trash. Unlike this game, Lasker, Tarrasch. Okay. Now, this game was a double bishop ending, and they just traded all the bishops. Okay. And Tarrasch was doing a Mike Kummer. He was like, this pawn isn't going to queen, but these pawns are going to queen. So he was like, I'm going to beat Lasker. And Tarrasch and Lasker didn't like each other. Unlike players of today, we all love each other. Okay? But back then, they didn't like each other. Okay? And, Tarrasch was like, I'm going to beat this world champion. What a potser. I got him crushed. So Tarrasch played a5. And he was like, I'm going to get a queen, but you're not going to get a queen. Okay. However, if you saw the last position, which I showed 2 minutes ago, you could actually figure out how to draw this with white. Also, if you were the world chess champion, Emanuel Lasker, you could also figure it out. Okay, Lasker, not so bad. Lasker was the second good player in chess. Morphy, then Lasker. Then everybody else was pretty good. Okay, but between Morphy and Lasker, a lot of suspicious characters. Blunder, 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 blunder. It was like the Knights tournament. Okay, but Lasker was pretty good. So even in these complicated endings, he could figure out the only way to draw. Now, if white does nothing, black will make a queen, I guarantee it. Let's do some Mike Kummer analysis. Let's do nothing. Okay, then A4. Okay, and then we'll do nothing. And now you can see either pawn move wins. Let's go here, I don't know. And then we make a queen. So black's going to push his pawns and make a queen. I guarantee it. So white has to do something about that. But as you can see, these moves are illegal. I can't get my king over there. And even if I could play king f7, I still can't get my king over there. This king is stopping everything. So Lasker played the only logical move to get counterplay, Mike Kummer.
H4.
H4. Put it in H. Now, if it was white's turn to move, white would play H5 and win. So he didn't like that, so he played king to G4. If you remember the last puzzle, you will know what white did in this position. White moved his king towards both pawns, obviously overlooked by Tarash. King to G6. Now white's threatening H5, which would win. If white plays king F6, black wouldn't take this pawn. Black would start the queening process. And black would actually push his C pawn because the white king can't catch the A pawn. Aw. Even though the king is in the square, that pawn's not really helping white very much. You can't take your own pawn. Okay. So Tarash thought he was probably going to win, but Lasker played the brilliant king to G6. Now white's threatening H5, which queens the pawn, so he took. And now the white king is just close enough to stop the pawns. And draw agreed. Even here, almost everybody can draw, almost. If you've been to the chess club as much as I have, then you don't say everybody. But king G6, very similar, very nice idea. I like it. Okay, now the last one is my endgame because we start with mine and finish with mine. We finish on a low note, unlike George Costanza. Okay, and I just went to a Festivus party, so I'm against Costanza. Now, in this position, material's equal, but my rook is better than his rook, and his bishop on G2 has no future. Okay, it actually applied to several universities, and they said no. They said, you're terrible. You can't go anywhere. You got nothing. Okay, now my opponent played king to E1, kicking my rook out. But I've been kicked out of better places. Okay, and I'm like, I don't want to get kicked off to 7th rank. I'm going here. And he's like, no, you got to go. Okay, now I made a controversial move. Okay, I gave my rook away, confusing Mike Kummer, because he doesn't see how I could give my rook away. It's like, how'd you give your rook away? Of course, I could trade, but I didn't want to draw because then I wouldn't win. If you're taking notes, write that down. When you draw, you don't win. Okay, well, if you don't want to trade, if you trade rooks, I don't think you're going to win. I think it's going to be a draw. So I played the obvious move, Julian. There's an obvious move that's not rook takes rook. I'm serious. You can find it. A3? A3? I didn't see A3. Then he would take my rook and go win my pawn, right? Yeah. I don't like that. Then I don't have that pawn anymore. It's the most obvious move on the board. Mike Kummer. There's only one move that's not rook takes rook. I guarantee it.
Rook C2?
Rook C2. Yeah. Okay, now, if his knight moves away, I don't know where it moves away.
I was trying to get rid of my rook.
Yeah, well, you will.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the knight can't really move because then A2 is hanging. And also, I don't see a place for the knight to move. Knight D1 is terrible. Knight E4, I just win the A2 pawn and I win. So my opponent played a very sneaky move, confusing Mike Kummer. Yes.
King D1.
King to D1. And my rook only has one safe square here. And then he played King D2, and I have no safe squares. What's that? Just like who?
It's just like your game with French, right?
Yeah, I'm down a rook, so I resign. Exactly. Yeah. And I have a pawn on E6, so it's very similar to the French. All right. Now, some of you may have been to my previous endgame lectures. You may have even watched at home, and you probably commented something like, bring back Aviv. Okay. Anyway, in my endgame lectures, I talk about two things very common. Move your king up the board and advance your passed pawns and have lots of passed pawns. If you don't queen a pawn, it's very hard to win an endgame. Mating with a lone knight, not easy. Mating with a bishop, not easy. Promoting a pawn to a queen and winning, priceless. Okay. Now, I am going to lose my rook, but I'm going to take a lot of pawns. So I start taking them. And I have a minor piece and 2 pawns for a rook. Now, some people like rooks. You're allowed your own opinion. And I like rooks as well. However, I don't see what white rook is going to do. Usually your rook's on the 7th rank, and it's great. That rook just on B1 doesn't do anything. Also, when you have extra pawns, which could happen, then you want to have a majority of pawns. You don't want to have 3 pawns to 2 and 3 pawns to 2. You're not going to queen those pawns. You want 3 pawns to 0, or 3 pawns to 1, or 4 pawns to 1, and your pawns are overwhelming. And this is exactly what black has. Black is even on the king's side, but has 3 pawns on the queen's side. Now, any grandmaster would want to have black here, because black has good winning chances. Probably black's not winning, but black's going to try to win, and white's going to try to stop all those pawns. Computer says it's about equal, but that's because it can somehow stop the pawns, but humans can't. Okay, so here come the pawns. Let's go with the pawns. Hooray for pawns. Okay, yay pawns, more pawns. Okay, and he's trying to push his pawns, but he's just kidding. Okay, my pawns are the ones that are, yeah, those are some good pawns. Okay, and this was quite funny. I still have pawns, by the way. Okay, and this is one of the funniest things that ever happened in my chess career, ever. Not the funniest, but one of the funniest. This position, I was waiting the last 6 or 7 moves for my opponent to resign. And when this endgame started, I'm slightly better, but then I pushed my pawns up and he did nothing. He's in time trouble. But obviously white's position is silly. His king and bishop are here. My king walked up the board. His rook's on the 7th, but it can't attack anything. And I've won a pawn, and now I'm getting several queens. So every move I thought he would resign, but he was making moves. Okay, that's his choice. And in this position, my opponent went to make a move, and I thought he was putting his hand out to resign. His hand went like this, and I was expecting resignation. So when he put his hand out, I put my hand over the board, and he looked at me, and he went, yeah, and he shook my hand. He was like, yeah, I resign. I sort of enticed his resignation. He's like, that's better than the move I was going to make. Right. If you put this on an engine, it says I'm up 6. Yeah. So I was, when he looked at me and like stopped with his hand, I was like, oh, he's going to make a move. Darn. But then he's like, yeah, okay, I resign. Sir.
What do you put the white rook on? What would be H7?
Yeah. That's where it is.
I mean H2.
Here?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the least amount of fun you can have. Because your king, bishop, and rook are all terrible. I would probably play B3. And then I would move my king and knights up. And man, it's not fun for white. I mean, it's fun for black.
Okay. I'm just thinking, so the pawn could take that pawn.
You could do that. I would agree with that.
And you could go to, let me get the coordinate, would be E2 with the rook.
Rook to D2? I like moving my king up because that's what the lecture's about. So, and then I'm going to play knight to C4, and man, it's tough. It's rough, I tells you. Well, after knight C4, I think I have a lot of options. Yeah.
Well, I can see eventually, but
Yeah, he's gonna. Yeah. At the higher levels, you resign here. At the lower levels, white wins half the time. Yeah.
how about the bishop up one? It'll lose to the pawn, but then
Yeah, I'm gonna leave my pawns here so you suffer. I'm never gonna move them. You're gonna look at them and go, ah, why are the guy's pawns there? If I was black, I would play knight c4, and my king would come up here, even here. That's how strong black's position is. Yeah. Yeah, if you put this on a chess engine, it says black's up like 10. Sort of like the equivalent of a queen. Because white can't do anything. Yeah. But see, here's the thing. You guys wait for your opponents to resign. That's why you're not grandmasters. You have to like insist. You resign. Yeah. I've actually resigned from my opponents in blitz games. They usually agree. When they're down 9 or 10 pieces, they're like, all right. Right. Now here, you don't necessarily have to resign, but he moved his hand in such a way where I thought he was resigning, so he tricked me. But the way he shrugged his shoulders and shook my hand, that was one of the greatest moments of my chess career. I really like that. And this was, I'd only worked at the chess club here for a couple of months when this game was being played. And this was a funny tournament because I remember I flew to Dallas and I played in a chess tournament. Well, I flew to, eventually was Lubbock, but Dallas then Lubbock. I played a tournament in Lubbock and I finished my game on the last round, and then I flew to Chicago and played the next day. I'd never done that before. And I came in second and first. Terrible. Okay. Luckily the chess club was paying me all the time. So that's why I think I did so well. But yeah, that was a nice example of bad king, no good. The king on c1 is not a good king. And advance your passed pawns. And in this instance, the pawns and his terrible king position, not to mention his terrible bishop position. His bishop's actually trapped. Terrible. But his bishop has to stay here so I don't break through and get a queen. Although that might have saved him some trouble. Then, he could resign. Okay, you prefer black? Yeah. Okay, so what did you learn about the ending? Hopefully nothing if you're playing me. But if you're playing other people, move your king up. Unlike his king on c1, he moved it up, but it was up for me. The king on c1, that's not, he should be taking my pawns with his king. And with so many arrows and red squares, then you'll be green with envy. And it also looks like a Christmas tree. Good timing. Question? Yeah, what you said. What? All right. And now for my 2 favorite words of every class. Class dismissed. Very good. Yeah.